Just wanted to go through some of the telltale signs, like the easy signs to spot that you're around someone who is toxic, and this is to kind of bring it to a layman point of view. You hear all these fancy terms of narcissist and psychopath and all these fancy terms thrown around, but how does that actually help you in the real world? Do you want to be going, oh, is that person, are they a narcissist? Are they a psychopath? Are they a borderline? Whatever. I just want to kind of go through stuff that I've seen from personal experience. I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not claiming to be. Just going through personal experience and people who've made me feel uneasy, made me just feel like I'm inadequate. And that's a telltale sign right there. Someone who makes you feel like you're not enough and always have to one up them, so go up and up and up. Everything's always a competition. That's a really good sign. Someone who you're nervous about because you're nervous about what they might say about you. What are they going to point out? Oh, look at the state of him. Look at, and someone who comes into the room and that's the first thing they do is extremely toxic. So I'll give you an example, and I've given one before, but three of my mates used to live up in Dublin in a fancy house in Dublin 4. Lovely place, for three lads anyway. And there was one of them, and the other two lads would either try to appease him and lick his arse, they'd always be saying what he wanted them to say, and they would always be kind of, you know, be below him, kind of bigging him up. If he said something, they would back him up. If I said something to this guy up here, these two would be down here backing this lad up, you know. And when I kind of pulled away from that, they both kind of were vying for his approval. It's just the kind of way he was. He was always loud and boisterous and always just coming out with, stupid random shit. But that made him funny and popular because he was a bit more extroverted than me or the other lads were. We were kind of more introverted. But I was hanging around with him longer, so I kind of pulled back from him earlier. I wouldn't have lived with him, it sounded toxic. But one of the lads got a haircut anyway, he got a fade, and one side was longer than the other. And I was baffled, I was amazed. The first thing he said was, oh shit, one side's longer than the other, he's gonna say something. And I was like, why the fuck would you live with someone like that? He was on edge for the whole day that your man would come in and say something about the hair. And lo and behold, when he got in, he was like, oh my god, what the fuck did you do with your hair? And he was like, see, I fucking told you. And I was there like, I couldn't live like that. I couldn't live with someone who was always on my case about everything all the fucking time. And imagine, like, just the state of hypervigilance you'd be in with someone doing that. So I think that's a pretty good example. You'll work with people like this as well, unfortunately. And I have people who are always just criticising you, like, it's unavoidable, these situations. And it can be a family member, a friend, a work colleague. Some people you can avoid. Usually, if it's not at least one of those three, you'll be able to avoid it. Most cases. But the toxic sign is someone who makes you feel inadequate. So there was a girl that I used to hang around with in college, and I noticed that when we were in her presence, all the lads would become way more toxic towards each other. Like, as pathetic as you've got a little dick. I've been up in court, on charges because I battered some fella. I'm a. One lad literally said this, right? He did kickboxing or something, but he said, I'm not. What was it? I'm not an athlete, I'm a weapon. And I was like, oh, fucking hell, what a cringy thing to say. But it brings out the worst in people, and especially when you're vying for girls, there's a lot of competition. But look out for that one, especially if you're with your mates, and they will do that a lot. There's a lot of girls that will play lads off against each other to see who's the top dog, and it's kind of primal stuff. It's like in South Park, they all turn into cavemen when they start fancying a girl with big knockers. They all go, they all kind of start making dog noises. Um, It's mad, but that's one way of seeing toxic behaviour, you know. And I've noticed it's different when I go to Spain, and when I've dealt with Spanish students in the past. There's a real air of boys and girls are comfortable with each other. You know, there doesn't seem to be that competition and that feistiness because they're very comfortable with each other. And I've seen lads who you'd be like, how did he get that girl? But it's because they kind of normalise it at a young age, if that makes sense. In Ireland, we're still oppressed. It's just something I've picked up, you know. It could be the same there, I don't know, but just on my observation, no. But that's another toxic behaviour. Um, Someone who's above you position wise. So I'm a manager, you're an employee, and they're lording it over you, you know, because they have that position. People who act like they can tell you what to do. Normally, it's with people who are insecure about where they are in their job. You know, they think they should be the boss, but they're not, and they lord it over you because you're the newest member of staff, and they're pissed off, and you're the easiest target. In social settings, it'll always be making stuff a competition. So it'll be subtle stuff like me and the boys from Trinners, you know, Trinity or UCD, and it'll be like, oh, where did you go up to college again? And they know full well where you went. But it's not as prestigious as where they went, you know. It'd be like the equivalent of saying, you know, the boys in Cambridge or Oxford, and then they'd be like, where did you go to uni? It's posh English knobs always say uni. Posh Irish knobs just go college, usually. And then the US, I think people in America know this all too well because it's very materialistic. But if someone goes to Stanford or obviously Harvard, Yale, the Ivy League places, they'll definitely bring it up. There's definitely a lot more. It seems a lot more fake over there, but we definitely have it over here as well. But if someone's from Harvard or Yale or Oxford, well, they wear the scarf or the tie, you know. Dan Aykroyd in Trading Places, like, where's my Harvard tie? And it's real kind of condescending. And people can do it in other ways, like if they're better than you at sport, they might say, like there was one lad actually, and here's a good example. So I knew this fellow from primary school, and then he went to a private school and played rugby there. And you know, the coaching's much better. They actually pay their coaches, so you can't really compete with that. But he was always talking about how great his gym stats were, and you know, I'm very strong in this area. And he was always bigging himself up unbelievably. And my brother said that one of his mates was working for this guy's mum. She owned the shop, and he was a real prick about picking up a box, you know, so bending down and looking around to see who was staring at him, you know. He went to the same university as I did, and apparently he lied about that and said he went to UCD because he was embarrassed. I was like, you gobshy, you know. Clearly insecure though. And we both played for the rugby team. And I knew one of the lads who was coaching the rugby team, a very good player, you know, and a very down to earth lad. And he was chatting to me. He was like, oh, damn, you're playing rugby, surely? And I was like, yeah, if I can get the time off, because my course was so full on. And he was like, we'll give you absence slips, don't mind. Um, but it'll be fine. And then he asked me if I knew this other lad, you know, the really cocky fella. And he was like, do you know him, Dan? And I was like, yeah, why? And he was like, bit of a prick, isn't he? And I was like, a little bit, yeah. And I was like, why? And I was laughing, and he goes, well, he was playing with us the other day, and you know, we asked him how he got on, like, how'd you find it? And he was like, oh, you know, it was all right. It's nothing like Interpros, because he had a trial with Connacht or something. Um, you're there thinking to yourself, fucking, what a dickhead thing to say. And your mum was just saying to me, like, he wasn't even that good. You know, if he was excellent, you go, all right, fair enough. He's at another level. But he was like, you know, it's all right, but it's not the level I'm used to. But not playing very well, you know. So people like that will always overestimate their abilities, and That's why you need to take everything they say with a pinch of salt and go bullshit. You're talking out your arse, because a lot of these people will. And he said to me, he was like, "You just rocked up with us, played 10 times better than him, and you're asking if you played well, And that's the kind of way I was. I was always asking, did I play well? Did I play well? As I get older, I'm kind of like, I don't care as much, And you should stop seeking approval, because you're kind of giving that power over to somebody. Do you know what I mean? You're better off knowing in yourself that you gave as much as you did and not looking for the praise, just going out, playing, and enjoying it. But usually people like that who talk themselves up all the time and try and put you off your game if they're playing against you, that's because they don't have the ability. If they were so confident in their ability to play, they wouldn't have to keep putting you off your game. And you see that a lot. It's effective at times, but I never really liked it. People who really overestimate their own abilities they're delusional. But that's a really narcissistic thing right there. Just what we're throwing out, narcissism. That's the thing. People who make you feel like you always have to go one step above and one step above. Everything's a competition, to see who's more of a man. Or now it can happen with women as well, but I just wouldn't know personally. People who always have you on edge because they're always there saying, "Oh well, I did that better than you did." Even with something simple. Like, I experienced it before with someone simply cutting a pizza. She said she cut a pizza better than I did, and I was like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "Well, it's safe to say I did it much better than you," and you're like, "All right." You'll almost be left wondering, is this person for real? You know, and usually, like, they are, but you're taken aback by it. You're kind of like, "Hold on a second." A lot of toxic people will never go into a domain that they don't understand. They'll always stay in their section where they know everything, so they can, bring you down. They can tell you, "No, you're wrong, I'm right." And I talked about the guy that did my manual handling training before. Like, we had a safe pass, and this is a guy who's been on site for years, knew what he was doing, top of his game. More knowledge probably than the other fella, and definitely more knowledge on an actual building site. But he was really relaxed, he was letting us go home early and really chilled out, really nice guy. But the fella doing the manual handling was just such an arsehole, you know. If we asked him anything he didn't know, he'd always put it back on us. Watch for that, He'd go, "Well, I'm not an employee of this company. You are." So it's like, "Well, I can't be expected to know that, but you can." That kind of way. It's very subtle, but it's like, how on earth will I know that? You're stupid for not knowing that I shouldn't know that. It's almost like, it sounds confusing, and that's what they're kind of getting at. Because if they make it confusing, you're kind of left going, who's in the right and who's in the wrong here? Plus, you're there to do a safe pass or a manual handling certificate, so you just want to get it done and leave. But he knows that you're dependent on him signing you off. If you don't complete it, you don't get your certificate, and then you're not able to work. So the book stops with him, quite literally. So yeah, just watch out for that. And I find a lot of people that do manual handling, they're usually pricks. They're usually sticklers for the rules. Safe pass, not so much. No, I have to say. Usually it's lads from building sites who are, they're just up for getting their safe pass, having a laugh, and getting back to work. That's all. That's just been my experience now. I know it's not the same for everyone, but watch out for that. People running courses who have to pass you, and if they don't pass you, you don't get to work, because they're the types of people that are going to lord it over you because they can, because they know whatever happens, you need them to sign off on your work. It's just stuff like that. And as I say, in general conversation, someone who is always trying to one up you or telling you that your achievements are nothing, you know, like saying, "Oh, that's great, but I did this," and you just feel exhausted in their company. And so, what can you do in that situation? Well, if you can take yourself away from it, I would say, don't waste your breath. You could argue back, you could say this, you could say that. why waste your time and energy? Quite literally. Or if you do want it and you've got something, like if you ever find out that the person's talking out their arse, bring it up. Why not? Let's challenge them to it. Because you're like, hold on a minute, you said you could do this, you can't do it. And it's like, no, I never said that. And I'm like, yes, you did. Remember that friend that I mentioned at the start who used to always make the two lads feel terrible about themselves? He used to, because he got the skin fade. One side was longer than the other. Remember him? Well, the amount of times I would say something to him that he told me, and he would deny, he'd say he'd never told me that. He denied ever telling me. Like, we were watching a football game before, and it was Brighton against United, Manchester United, Brighton Hove Albion against Manchester United, and they were losing at half time. His team was Manchester United, and he said, "Oh, watch, that United will come back in the second half and win this game." And I was like, "Yeah, sure," and they didn't. And I turned around and said, "They really came back and won it in the second half, didn't they?" And he was like, "I never said that." And then another fella came and was like, "Yes, you did." He was like, "Yeah, but what I meant was," it's like, trying to talk yourself out of a situation when you're banged to rights. It's people like that have to be in control of everything you do. The same guy will ring me up and go, "Come here," or "Go there." And if I say no, it'll be, "Ditch these people that you're with now and come over to me because I said so." But if I ever said the same thing to him, he would go, "Fuck off." It wouldn't even be expected. It wouldn't even be said because he just wouldn't do it. But he would expect me to drop everything and go to him. So look at a relationship with balance. And if you're doing all this and they're doing nothing, then balance it back out. And you can have people who give you all these things, like they seem amazing because they're always giving you money, or they're always have girls around with them, and then all of a sudden you find yourself going up and up and up, and them doing little and little. That's how it can start. So you're not going to go out with someone or you're not going to be in a friendship with someone who doesn't offer anything, and you're giving everything to the relationship. No, what's going to happen is they'll give you everything. They call it love bombing. Now, that's normally with a romantic relationship, but it can happen with friendships as well, where they give and give. This lad would always have money, so he'd always buy you something in the shop. You'd say, "No, I'm okay," but he'd go, "No, no, it's alright, I'll get that for you." And you'd be like, "Oh, what a sound guy." But little by little, it starts to go and the balance starts to drop, and then you're doing everything. So it's something to watch out for. It often doesn't start as clear cut as it seems. Anyone who makes you feel uneasy, usually there's some toxicity there, and you should watch out for it, right? It's always a case of trust your gut instinct. That won't lie to you down there. It's usually trying to keep you safe, and we ignore it an awful lot. If you don't feel easy in the situation, pull yourself back, take a step back, and calm yourself down and think. Have a look at it rationally when you're not there and go, what am I in this relationship for? Like, what am I actually getting from it? Am I just going out to be seen with people? And that's what I did for a long time. Because, it's the thing to do when you're young, is go out with people, and, you have to be out with people, and you have to be party all the time, and it's what young people do. But I've been with people who slag me, and I don't feel like they're trying to rip into me and drag me down. And I've been with people who are literally just taking the piss out of me to make themselves feel better or to look better. You'll know the difference. And if you have to take a step back and look at it from a rational point of view, because emotions can be high and you can be very triggered by a situation or emotionally sensitive to it at the time, and you can look back and go, actually, I was wrong in that situation. But take that step back, because remember, dialectical behavioural therapy, we've got the rational and we've got the emotional brain. You can't be in the same state at both times. Emotional brain just wants to go now. Rational brain thinks. It's like, oh, perhaps I was wrong, or perhaps they were wrong, you know. And it's just a better way to live, you know. A better way of figuring it out and figuring out if the situation is toxic or whether you just simply need a bit of time on your own and a break from certain people, which is okay too. Okay, it's alright to take a break and pull back. I've done a lot of that recently, and I probably need to do even more, to be honest. But yeah, that's just a little rundown of toxic people and ways they'll be toxic to you, and really it all boils down to how you feel before meeting someone. If you feel really anxious about it, you know, you might have, especially like if you've gotten a new haircut and they might slag you off about it. They point out stuff about you that's very visibly obvious. You might have weight on, you know, you might be trying to grow a funny mustache or a goatee. You might be doing Movember and just have the tash. And if there's someone always bringing up something like that about you or what they can take the piss out of, they're good at getting people on board to do the same. And it can be something very stupid, but they're very good at getting a gang of leaders. You know, they're a very good ringleader. And they'll say something, and you're kind of like, oh, shut up, will you? And they're like, ah, it annoys them, and then people will keep hammering and hammering. And people are more likely to join that person because that person seems confident they've got it all together. So join the ringleader or risk being cast aside and discarded by the herd, essentially. The pack mentality, am I right? But yeah, I hope that helps. Let me know any toxic people you've encountered and any advice that you might have on dealing with that, you know. The more people that are talking about it and sharing about it, the better. While I'm off and have to take it easy with the head injury, I just thought I'd come on and talk about that. Use my time productively. So I hope that helped, guys. Haven't been making long videos as often because I've just been busy and it's easier to make a quick video while I'm walking, you know. The longer ones take more time. But I hope that helps, and as I say, leave anything you have below in the comments. We're over 800 subscribers. I'm delighted with that. Keep it coming in. Keep commenting, keep liking, sharing. I've got the buy me a coffee as well if you'd like to help me out financially. I'd really appreciate it, please. Because I don't make any money from this. And I don't have to monetize the channel if the buy me a coffee gets a lot of traction. There's a link to that in my posts, and there's also a QR code which you can scan. Alright, and there's also my 12 dips of December. I'm gonna have to take a break from swimming for this week because you're not supposed to cold water swim with the concussion. I could faint and then get hypothermia, and it's getting freezing out now, so want to have all my senses with me. But I'll get back to it definitely before December, and I'll get my 12 dips in for December, please God. So, yeah, hope you are all well, guys, and look, mind yourselves, have a great Christmas as well, and do all the things you enjoy, have nice food, and spend time with family. Now that's what I'll be doing, and what I absolutely will not be doing is drinking alcohol. I hear Rockshore alcohol free is a very good option, which I hopefully can get my hands on, please God. So that's all from me anyway, guys. Slán go fall and stay well. Alright?